Hey Rodney, how are you doing?
Is this a real question, or you just like want to know how I'm doing?
Would love to talk a little bit about your relationship with philanthropy because I feel like you have been a consistent voice of very morally righteous critique for years. You're also a Ford Foundation fellow. You're part of an incredible class of leaders who've been selected to be part of the Ford Foundation. And so you took that fellowship. You also supported publicly a critique of Ford Foundation's recent decision to raise $1 billion through the bond market to support additional grant making. And last year, you wrote something in early 2019 that really reads like something many other people are writing now. You said the goal for foundations should no longer be to accumulate wealth, further enabling wealth inequity to persist. Foundations must fundamentally change their way of operating by redistributing wealth, democratizing power, and shifting economic control to communities. This requires a shift in our underlying assumptions about the role of capital and our underlying approach to philanthropy. I'm really interested about how you hold on to those truths while also going to those same foundations who you're saying have a moral obligation to stop accumulating wealth, um, and asking them for their money. And so, how do you navigate the need to draw on these resources from our existing system to fund the work that ultimately seeks to upend that system?
Anthony, I think that we live in nuance and we live in complexity, right? And so it's important that I myself willingly engage in this nuance. And I don't think everyone should nor has to. And oftentimes, have a little bit of a jealousy of those who can like really focus less on this and on this kind of, this nuance, this sort of approach, but can actually dive in more completely into disrupting the system. And so, Anthony, when we around the same time that we first met, a few months later, I had published a piece, "The Need for Black Rage and Philanthropy,"
Yeah.
right? That actually received a lot of attention. I did not realize that it would. I was getting hundreds of emails, hundreds, particularly from African American leaders in philanthropy. Um, and the reason why I bring this up is because when I wrote that, there were people, friends of mine, colleagues that are really concerned, said, "Wow, is Rodney okay?" Like, is he okay? He's writing this piece. And I remember a funder saying to me at a gathering that we convened after, saying, "Well, when I read this piece that Rodney wrote, I thought to myself, wow, he's really biting the hand that feeds him." And I bring this up because one of the challenges that I think philanthropy needs to grapple with is that philanthropy does not, in fact, feed Black and Brown folks, right? And I think this is part of the thing is that it's philanthropy as a sector has a strong catalytic effect. But I think that mentality alone, that this Black man from West Baltimore is being fed by philanthropy, that did not sit well with me. And I think that approach, though, unfortunately, is across the sector, right? That kind of mentality. And so for me, when I think about, my critique, it's really a loving critique. It's really about what are we in this work for, right? Is it that we want to accumulate wealth and power such that certain individuals and institutions can maintain that power and grow it? Or are we actually in the work of social and racial justice, right? And when we think about it, when you bring up the critique that I supported of Ford Foundation's decision to issue bonds, it was very smart finance, of course. I can understand that. And at the same time, if the central activity is to maintain the endowment rather than say gifting pieces of the endowment to communities most impacted, allowing for investments into economic structures that can actually build up the capacity of communities that have been most impacted by injustice. Those are the types of questions that I believe that philanthropy needs to ask. Because again, when I look at the preservation of, say, an endowment, one of the conclusions I make is that only those with endowments should have the decision-making ability as it relates to impacting social and economic and racial injustice, right? And I don't agree with that. I mean, we know that one of the reasons why we're in this scenario is because of extraction and exploitation. And so one of the considerations around that is that for organizations like myself, I mean, I'm pretty unique in the sense that I am an African American male from a place like Baltimore, not Ivy League educated, all these sort of things, leading an institution of a certain size and moving forward with it. And I would say that, you know, from that perspective, I've lived it, I've experienced it, and I've seen it up close that many communities do in fact have the capacity to own their own development and power. Philanthropy has an opportunity to invest in that capacity, or maintain its own power. And we've seen a number of institutions make decisions to say, we're going to prioritize, whether it's like a Chorus Foundation saying, hey, not only are we going to spend down, but it's not about spending down, it's actually leveraging our capital to enhance the ability of communities most impacted to actually develop their own economic power for the long term. So our foundation will disappear, but this community will have ownership and decision-making power over itself. And so I think that is something that, to me, I think you can have a conversation about both, because I don't suspect that most folks who enter in philanthropy are saying, I really want the system to maintain forever. They don't consciously believe in that. I have to believe that that is not what consciously people think about. I think most people are attracted to the work because they actually want to make a difference. They want to make change. And so if you can really start to think about other ways of making that change that actually get you closer to your objective, I think there's a process and a way that you can communicate that with people. And that's how I think about the way that I could lovingly critique philanthropy and try to leverage those resources.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. What do you hope could be different at a time frame of 10, 20 years from now because of what this country has gone through so far in 2020?
Yeah, I would hope that 10 years from now, there would be less need or dependency upon philanthropic resource, right? And I think that philanthropy is always going to have to play a role. And what I'm talking about, Anthony, I'm not talking about more institutions doing earned income, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually Black POC institutions and communities, and institutions not necessarily defined as 501, that's not for profits, by the way, 501c3s. I think that's critically important when we look at it from a racial perspective, that some of the most impactful organizations are not, in fact, in that form. And so what I would say is that in 10 years, a less reliance and, in fact, philanthropy being catalytic investment such that these institutions and communities, again, have more economic power and ownership for themselves, right? And so, again, that goes back to your question about my support of that critique of Ford, is that actually, would we be able to make more impactful change if, say, communities in the Delta had, $3 billion of their own resources that they directly controlled versus having to work within institutions and outside institutions to drive that type of investment? What if they had it themselves? What are opportunities for us to build over the next 10 years a real economic infrastructure that's supported or invested in by philanthropy, that enables that sort of shift? That is the future that I would like to see in the next 10 years. I think we can do that. To your point, am I optimistic about it? No, but I'm less cynical.
What would it take for the people listening to this? What do they all need to do differently to help that vision you described become real over the next 10 years?
Well, first of all, Anthony, there has to be a belief in Black and brown people. That's the first thing. The culture that we live in, backed by white supremacy, anti-Black racism, it actually diminishes the way that we view and see Black and brown folks, not just in this country, but everywhere, right? We actually render folks invisible. We certainly don't see women of color in the ways that we need to. And so I think that's the first step. But the truth of the matter is, if you simply have belief in these communities, the rest of it is actually pretty easy. I look at venture capital, right? Venture capital, which is about 80 or 75% of venture capital backed businesses are founded exclusively by white men. And we also know about 75% of venture capital backed businesses do not return capital to their investors. Now, if that were the case and it was 75% were Black women, venture capital, I believe, would not exist. Right? As an industry, it would just cease to exist. And I bring that up to say that we've demonstrated the capacity to trust and believe in certain segments of our society and completely diminish and write off others. So the first step that I do think that foundations, investors, et cetera, have to believe in is they have to believe in the capacity and brilliance of Black, brown, people of color communities, those that have been most impacted by economic injustice. And the fact that like folks are able to lead despite all the remarkable challenges that have been placed upon us is actually, very encouraging. And so what I am optimistic about, Anthony, is I'm optimistic about the ability of those who have been most impacted to continuously uprise, right? I have boundless optimism around that. And so I think if others in philanthropy and those in investment had that same sort of belief, things would unlock and change pretty remarkably fast.
I know we only have a few more minutes left. Anything else you wanted to cover that we didn't get to?
Well, Anthony, while we have a few more minutes, I think it's really interesting to get a perspective from you on, how are you seeing things? What's your level of optimism? How are you balancing right now? Because NFF has this really unique role, and you as a leader, independent of NFF, have a unique role. So I'm just curious, like, how are you feeling right now?
Yeah, I mean, so we're fascinated by the potential in this moment to really take this idea that we can exist to be allies rather than leaders to its furthest conclusion. And be totally frank, the journey with the Partnership of Common Future has really helped crystallize that for us, because I think we, at least as we see it, you came to us and said, let's be partners in doing some work, because NFF has a platform around economic, moving money, and you guys have a network, and let's put those two together. And then you came back to us and said, actually, in this moment, we don't need you as a prop. We're going to build that ourselves. And so it challenged the NFF team to say, well, if we're serious about, to your point about our moral obligation to live our values, then we are going to take this idea that we exist to help organizations like Common Future to its logical conclusion, which forces us into a role that we don't have a precedent for. It might be out there, but the idea of what does it mean to truly build an organization entirely premised around financial allyship to others is something intermediaries say they are about, but I think it's very challenging. And so I think my team is super excited. I, as a leader, have to both confront the business model implications of that. But again, we're just going to walk in faith and make it work. But the other point is, you and I, we've all been raised in a dominant cultural set of norms about what is leadership and how is leadership measured and how is success measured. And we are being challenged to upend those and generate a set of norms that is around equitable. What is an equitable culture as opposed to a dominant culture? And so it's disorienting and it's exciting, but I also say my stress comes not from worrying about whether NFF will be okay. It comes from worrying about whether I will be a worthy leader of the moment. That's the stress I have, because I think while crisis has always been in our communities, the fact that there has been a national awareness around crisis gives me a sense that we have a window that will not be open forever, in which we have to move forward.
Well, I appreciate that, Anthony. I think that the more and more people see how you can lead in these moments, I think it's impressive and transparent.